I chose a stranger's child over my own daughter's wedding. Not because I didn't love my daughter. Not because I was careless with family. But because some moments do not ask what matters to you, they demand who you are. The boy was already changing color when I pulled over. Gray around the lips, blue creeping into his fingertips. His body looked too light for the way his mother clutched him, like she was trying to hold a soul inside skin that was failing. She was kneeling on the roadside, rocking too fast, whispering words into his ear like language alone could command breath. Cars slowed, people stared, then they drove on. I stepped out in heels, meant for celebration, the gravel crunching beneath me too loud for something this fragile. When she lifted her head, the sound that left her mouth wasn't speech. It was fear stripped down to its bones. She tried to show me his face and almost dropped him because her arms were shaking so badly. I reached in without thinking, steadied his shoulder, felt how hot his skin was, how thin his breathing had become. Every inhale sounded borrowed. She kept saying they had sent her away. Papers. Identification. Next of kin. Her words tumbled like she was apologizing for existing. Behind us, traffic moved as if nothing was happening. My phone vibrated inside my purse. I didn't check it. I watched the boy's chest. When his breathing skipped, something inside me snapped into clarity. This was not a moment that waited for permission. "We're going," I said. Not loudly, not emotionally, just true. Her eyes locked on mine like she didn't trust hope anymore. "Put him in the back, gentle. If you're watching this right now, tell me what time it is, where you are, morning, afternoon, or night, because that moment felt like the clock itself had stopped to watch what I would do next." She fumbled with the door handle like she had forgotten how doors worked. I slid into the driver's seat. The smell of fear filled my car. "Where's the nearest hospital?" She pointed. She couldn't speak. I didn't ask for details. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't ask if she deserved help. The boy twitched once and went frighteningly still. I pressed the gas. I was dressed for my daughter's wedding, hair set, dress pressed, earrings chosen because they looked joyful. Everything about me said I was supposed to be somewhere else. But none of it mattered when I heard that thin, wheeze-again breath trapped behind something that would not open. "My name is Bridget Kincaid. I have raised a daughter into a woman. I have lived long enough to know the difference between being late and being wrong. I have learned that the world does not stop just because something sacred is happening in front of you." The hospital sign appeared through the windshield. Ordinary, bright, like what was happening in my back seat was not extraordinary at all. I didn't slow down. I didn't hesitate. I carried him inside myself before the doors even opened. They asked for papers. They always do. They asked who I was to him. I said what I had to say to get him through those doors. Somewhere in my purse, my phone kept vibrating, messages stacking, calls stacking, a ceremony beginning without me. But standing in that hallway, watching a child fight for air while his mother folded in on herself, I understood something that no invitation, no vow, no celebration could argue with. There are moments that define who you are not by what you say, but by what you are willing to lose. I did not apologize to myself. I did not look back at the road that would have taken me to music and white chairs and the life I was expected to step into that day. I stayed. I chose the child over the ceremony. And I did not yet understand what that choice was about to bring to my door. The automatic doors swallowed us into bright, cold air that smelled like disinfectant and old fear. And the first thing that hit me wasn't the noise. It was how fast people learned to look past suffering when it didn't come with the right kind of paperwork. I moved with the child in my arms while his mother stumbled beside me, talking too quickly, trying to explain him into being saved. A woman behind the desk lifted her eyes once, took in our faces, our panic, and her voice stayed flat like a closed door. "Name? Date of birth? Insurance?" The mother's mouth opened, and nothing steady came out. I watched her swallow hard, watched her hands grip the strap of a torn bag like it was the last thing tethering her to dignity. A nurse came around the corner and her eyes went straight to the child's color, straight to his chest, and for a second the room shifted, people moved because someone finally saw what I saw. "Triage," the nurse snapped, and the mother tried to follow, but a security guard's arm slid out in front of her like a gate. "Ma'am, you gotta check in." That was when I understood the real hallway test in places like this. Not whether a child is dying, but whether the adults around that child can prove they're allowed to be desperate. The mother's eyes went wild. "That's my baby," she said, voice cracking, and the guard didn't flinch. "We need an adult with identification and consent." His tone was polite in the way people are polite when they want you to stop arguing without giving you what you need. I felt heat rise in my face, not anger. Exactly, more like a sharp awareness that the world would let this boy fade while grown folks discussed forms. I reached into my purse, hands steady now, and placed my driver's license on the counter like a card in a game I did not want to play. "I'm here," I said. "I'm the adult. Tell me what you need." The woman behind the desk glanced at it, then glanced at me as if deciding what kind of person I was, somebody doing charity for a story, or somebody who would stand here until the room changed. "Relationship?" she asked. The mother started shaking her head, fear rushing back to her face like water. I answered before she could drown in it. "I'm the one who brought him in," I said. "I'm the one signing whatever you need signed to get him seen." The nurse returned, quick, focused, and spoke in a lower voice that carried weight. "We need consent. We need next of kin. We need to know who can authorize treatment if he crashes." The mother swayed on her feet like she hadn't eaten in days, and when she whispered, "I don't have," she stopped, because the sentence had too many humiliations in it. The desk clerk pushed a clipboard toward me. "Financial responsibility," she said, like that was a normal thing to ask strangers in a crisis. I didn't hesitate, but my stomach tightened as my pen hovered over the line because I knew what signing meant. It meant the cost. It meant the consequences. It meant the kind of decision nobody thanks you for when the bill shows up. I signed anyway. I signed like my hand belonged to a woman who already knew how the world treats mothers and grandmothers when they're the last line between a child and the floor. The mother stared at my signature like it was magic. "Ma'am," she whispered, and her voice held confusion and gratitude and shame all tangled together. I didn't let her sink into that. "Stay standing," I told her softly. "Keep your eyes open. They'll ask you questions." Another staff member appeared older, tired, impatient, and asked the mother for identification again, slower this time, like speaking louder could produce a wallet out of thin air. The mother's throat worked. She looked down the hallway where her child had disappeared, and something in her face tightened, not pride, not anger, something older, like survival turning into surrender. "If something happens," the staff member said, "we have to call somebody. We have to document next of kin." The mother's eyes flicked to me, then away, like she was terrified of being judged for the life she had fallen into. Her voice came out thin. "I can't," she said. Then she pressed her fingers to her forehead and shook her head once, hard like she was trying to knock sense back into herself. "I can," she corrected, and that small shift sounded like pain. "I can call." The staff member held out a phone, and the mother hesitated so long I thought she might refuse and let pride finish what sickness started. Then she took it with both hands, staring at the screen as if the numbers could burn her. "Name?" the staff member demanded. The mother swallowed, eyes glossy, and said it like a confession she had been protecting herself from for years. "Edwin Marlowe," she whispered. The hallway seemed to tighten around that name, the way it does when something powerful has been spoken in the wrong place. The staff member's eyebrows lifted before she could stop herself. "Spell it," she said, suddenly careful. The mother spelled it, voice shaking, then typed with trembling thumbs, and when she pressed call, the phone rang once, twice, then someone answered, crisp and alert, and the mother's breath caught because the call went through. The first time I heard the boy cry, it sounded thin and offended, like his body was angry at what it had just been dragged through. It wasn't a strong cry. It wasn't a healthy cry. But it was life, and in that hallway it hit my chest like a hand grabbing me back from the edge of something I didn't want to name. His mother folded in on herself when she heard it, not gracefully, not quietly. She slid down the wall like her bones had finally been given permission to stop pretending. Her palms pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking, eyes squeezed shut so tight it looked like she was trying to keep the world out. When she breathed again, it came out like a sob that had been waiting behind her ribs for a long time. "Thank you," she kept whispering, the same 2 words over and over, as if repeating them might keep the child alive. She reached for my wrist, not to hold me more like she needed to touch something real so she wouldn't float. Away. Her fingers were cold, her nails were ragged, her grip was desperate and respectful at the same time. I didn't pull away. The hospital moved on the way hospitals do once you stop being the emergency and start being paperwork. A nurse asked me to confirm what I'd signed. A clerk asked where the bill should be sent. Somebody said insurance again, like that word was a key they refused to stop trying in the wrong lock. I gave my address without thinking, because it was the only one I had. When the clerk repeated it back to me, I heard how plain it sounded, just a street name, a number, nothing fancy, yet it carried weight the way all personal information does when you put it into someone else's hands. Behind the glass doors, I caught a glimpse of the child on a bed, a small rise and fall under a warmed blanket, tubes taped down like the world had finally decided to take him seriously. His mother stood at the doorway watching him like she didn't trust the room to keep him if she blinked. Her eyes met mine and she nodded once, a silent promise to remember. She didn't ask me where I was going. She didn't ask me why I was dressed the way I was. All she knew was that I had stopped. In a world that likes to keep moving, stopping is a kind of miracle. My phone had been quiet for longer than it should have been. That was what made me reach for it. Not panic, pattern. When I pulled it from my purse, the screen lit up like a scolding. Missed calls. Texts stacked like small accusations. The top message was from my daughter. It was short, too short for a bride on her wedding day. "Where are you?" No heart. No, Mom. Just a period at the end, like she was putting me in my place even before she saw me. Another message followed from a number I recognized as my son-in-law's. "We're starting soon." And then, "Use side entrance when you get here." The words had the smoothness of something rehearsed. My stomach tightened, not with guilt, but with that quiet dread you feel when someone tries to control how you enter a room. I stared at the screen a second longer than necessary, letting the tones settle into my bones. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the picture. I slipped the phone back into my purse and turned my face toward the mother one last time. She was still by that doorway, shoulders hunched like she was bracing for someone to drag her away. The name she'd said in the hallway, Edwin Marlowe, kept circling my mind without landing anywhere. I didn't know it. Or maybe I did and couldn't place it yet. Either way, I had watched the staff change when she said it. Not kinder, just careful. And that kind of careful told me the woman I'd found on the roadside had fallen from a height I couldn't see. "Your baby's breathing," I said softly because I didn't know what else to offer her that wouldn't sound like a speech. She nodded hard, tears fresh again, then looked down at her hands like she was ashamed they had begged. "I won't forget you," she whispered. I believed her. I also knew belief didn't change the clock. When I finally walked out of the hospital, the day felt loud and shameless. Sunlight, traffic, people laughing into phones like nothing in the world was fragile. My car still smelled like fear and sweat and something metallic I didn't want to identify. I sat behind the wheel and let my hands rest there for one steadying breath. My dress pulled tight across my shoulders when I exhaled, reminding me of the world I was supposed to be in. I looked at the time and felt the weight of what I had chosen drop heavy in my chest. I did not apologize to myself. I started the engine, drove toward the venue, and with every mile my heart beat in 2 directions, one toward my child, one toward the child I had just helped keep alive. When I turned into the parking lot, the music inside the building was already going. I stepped out, smoothed my dress, and walked to the entrance with my chin lifted the way mothers do when they refuse to beg for space. The wedding doors were already closed. The doors opened on a hush that wasn't holy. It was staged. The kind of quiet that happens when a room has already decided what role you're supposed to play the moment you walk in. Music floated faint in the background, soft enough to pretend tenderness, but it couldn't cover the way heads turned like hinges. I stepped inside with my shoulders set, purse close to my body, dress still neat even though my insides felt wrung out. I had expected whispers. I had expected irritation. I had expected my daughter's eyes to flick toward me with that tight look brides get when they're worried about time. What I didn't expect was the way the air itself seemed to thicken, like the room had been waiting on me to arrive so something could finally happen. There were rows of white chairs, flower arrangements that looked expensive, candles glowing in glass the way people like to do when they want to make their love feel rich. I saw familiar faces from church. I saw women who had held my daughter as a baby, now dressed up and smiling like life had always been kind to them. And I saw servers in black, moving along the edges with trays held high, eyes trained on their steps instead of the guests. That detail hit me sharp, because I had just left a place where a child's life depended on adults being willing to move fast. Here, everything moved slow on purpose. I kept my gaze down, aiming for an empty seat near the back the way you do when you don't want attention. I wasn't trying to make an entrance. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wanted to sit. I wanted to breathe. I wanted to watch my daughter from a distance and hold whatever was left of my pride in my lap like a purse that had already been snatched once. My phone buzzed again inside my bag, but I ignored it. I had arrived. That should have been enough. It wasn't. A hand brushed my arm, light, polite, stopping me without stopping me. I turned and saw one of the women from my daughter's side, face tight with that smile people wear when they're about to say something mean in a gentle voice. "They're just about to do introductions," she murmured, eyes sliding past me like I was part of the wall. "You can just stand there a second." Her tone made stand sound like, "Wait your turn." I nodded once because I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I stayed where I was, near the entrance, half in shadow, half in view. That was when the DJ lowered the music. A small change, but it shifted the whole room. The chatter softened. People leaned forward, expecting charm, expecting jokes, expecting the groom to say something sweet about the bride. I watched Cedric Westbrook step up toward the microphone with the kind of confidence men wear when they think a room belongs to them. His suit fit perfectly. His smile was bright, practiced, warm enough to fool strangers and sharp enough to cut family. He didn't look like a man hiding anything. He looked like a man who had already decided the truth didn't matter as long as his version of it was the loudest. He lifted the mic and glanced around like a host, not a husband. He let his eyes travel across the guests, letting them feel chosen by his attention. Then his gaze slid toward the entrance, and first it landed on me. It didn't surprise him. It satisfied him, like he had been waiting for that exact moment, waiting for me to be positioned where everyone could see. His smile widened. All right, he said, voice easy, playful, the kind of tone that makes people relax their shoulders because they think they're about to laugh. He held the mic close and chuckled once, like he was sharing a harmless little family joke. I saw my daughter near the front, Talia, in white, glowing, surrounded by bridesmaids, and she didn't turn around. Not yet. She stayed facing forward like she was letting whatever came next happen without her having to watch it. Cedric lifted his free hand, palm out, as if he was about to introduce someone important. His eyes stayed on me. The room leaned in. A few people smiled already, ready to be entertained. That's the part that stung most, the way cruelty travels easiest when it's packaged as comedy. Then he said it. Let's welcome the burden in the family. The words landed clean, not slurred, not accidental. He spoke them like they were funny and true and overdue. For a second, I heard nothing else, no music, no chairs shifting, no clink of glass, just that sentence hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. The smiles on a few faces froze mid-curve. Someone near the aisle inhaled sharply. A server paused with a tray in their hands like even they felt the weight of what had just been done. My chest tightened, but my face stayed still. I stood at the entrance, dressed like love, holding my purse like a shield, feeling the whole room turn into a witness. The room went still. 7. The silence after Cedric's words wasn't the kind that protects people. It was the kind that measures them. A room full of grown adults held their breath, not because they didn't know what had just happened, but because they were waiting to see whether I would beg for my place or whether I would fight for it. I felt every eye on me like a hand on my back, pressing, testing. The DJ didn't even breathe into the microphone. The music stayed low, almost apologetic, like it wanted to disappear too. Cedric kept smiling. He let the quiet sit just long enough for the insult to settle into the tablecloths and the flowers. Then he gave a small laugh, like he expected the room to follow him into it. A couple of people tried thin, nervous little chuckles that died as soon as they were born. He looked pleased anyway, like even discomfort was a kind of control. His posture stayed loose, shoulders back, head tilted. He held the mic like a man holding court. I kept my face still. That was not a performance. That was survival. There are certain moments in a mother's life when you can feel something tear without blood. Something inside you that used to stretch and forgive suddenly refuses to move. I stood there in my good dress, hair done, earrings catching light, and I realized I wasn't embarrassed. I was being assigned. Cedric's eyes flicked toward the front. That's when my daughter finally turned. Talia's veil shimmered when she moved. Her makeup was soft and expensive, the kind that makes your skin look like it never struggled. She looked beautiful, truly. The kind of beauty that should have been wrapped in kindness. Her bouquet sat in her hands like she didn't want to crush it. She looked at me from across the room, and for a breath I waited for the old Talia, the girl who used to run into my kitchen barefoot, the one who used to press her cheek to my paws. I shouldered her when she was scared. The one who once cried because she thought I'd be lonely when she went off to school. I waited for her eyes to soften. I waited for her mouth to twitch into something familiar. Her eyes didn't soften. They slid over me the way people scan something they've already decided is inconvenient. There was no surprise, no concern, not even anger. Just a calm distance that said she had rehearsed this part in her head long before I stepped through that door. And that was when I felt the deepest cut, because cruelty from a stranger is one thing, but cruelty from your own child comes with memory attached. It doesn't just hurt, it rewrites. Cedric spoke again, still playful, still in control. "Come on, y'all," he said, voice bright, trying to pull the room back into comfort. "It's a celebration." His words were soft, but his eyes stayed sharp. He was offering the crowd permission to relax as long as I accepted my place. Talia rose slightly from her seat, not fully standing. Just enough for everyone to see her. She held her bouquet close, smile polite, chin lifted. Her voice carried without strain. It wasn't shaky. It wasn't confused. It was clear. "Go sit with the servers." She said it like she was giving directions, the same way you tell someone where the restrooms are, like it was practical, like it was normal. She didn't say mom. She didn't say please. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't acknowledge that I was late for a reason, that my hands still felt like hospital air, that my chest was still tight from watching a child fight for breath. She looked at me the way a bride looks at something that might ruin her photographs. A ripple moved through the room, small, ugly, unsure. Someone near the front dropped their eyes to their lap. An older woman I recognized from my church tightened her lips, face caught between disapproval and fear of making a scene. A young bridesmaid blinked fast, like she wanted to pretend she hadn't heard. A server near the wall shifted their weight, gaze fixed on the floor, because they understood what it meant to be told where you belong. I stared at my daughter, not because I wanted to win, because I wanted to understand what had happened to her. I searched her face for any sign of regret, any twitch that said she didn't mean it. What I found was a faint lift at the corner of her mouth. Not joy, not cruelty either. More like relief. Relief that she had done what she believed she had to do to be accepted in whatever world Cedric had promised her. That realization settled heavy inside me. This wasn't a moment of impulsive disrespect. This was a decision. This was alignment. She had chosen who she wanted to be seen as, even if it meant cutting me down in front of everybody. My throat tightened, not with tears, but with restraint. I could feel words gathering, the kind of words that would scorch the room and make people remember my name in whispers. I could feel my hands wanting to shake. I held both still. I looked at Cedric, and his smile widened just a fraction, like he was waiting for me to explode so he could call me the problem. Then I looked back at my daughter, and something in me went quiet. I stood without a word. I didn't move right away, not because I didn't know what to do, because I knew exactly what to do, and I needed my body to obey my mind instead of my hurt. The room was still waiting on me, to become what they had decided I was. Cedric's smile held steady like a spotlight. Talia's face stayed smooth, almost peaceful, like she had placed me somewhere, and now she could enjoy her moment without me taking up space in it. The people around them, friends, family, church members, sat in their seats like they had been glued there, eyes flicking between me and the plane aisle, hoping I would either disappear or perform. I could feel the heat behind my eyes, but I did not give it permission to fall. Tears would have been the kind of gift that makes cruel people feel powerful. I turned away from the front and walked back toward the entrance with slow, measured steps. My heels didn't click loud enough to make a statement. I didn't slam a door. I didn't throw my purse. I didn't say a single word. Silence is not weakness when it's chosen. Silence is a refusal to entertain. Behind me, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds longer than it should have. I heard someone clear their throat. I heard a chair shift. I heard a soft, nervous laugh that died quickly, like whoever made it realized there was nothing funny about what had been done. Cedric's voice floated after me, light and careless. "Ite, he said into the mic, trying to smooth it over for the guests, trying to turn my pain into a brief, awkward moment that could be edited out of memory. "Let's keep it moving." He did not call my name. He did not apologize. He didn't even pretend he hadn't meant it. He just moved on, because that's what men like him do when they think the world will let them. The double doors opened, and the noise outside hit me: cars, distant laughter, the hum of regular life continuing without permission. I stepped out into air that felt warmer than it should have, like the day was too bright for what had just happened. I walked past the decorated entrance sign with my daughter's new last name printed in fancy letters, past the flower arrangements that were meant to symbolize love, and none of it reached me. I felt like I was moving through a picture someone else had paid for. The parking lot stretched out in neat lines, and for a moment I stood still beside my car with my hand on the door handle, breathing slow and controlled, because I refused to break in a place that had already tried to make me small. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the messages. "Where did you go? Why are you acting like that? You embarrassed us." The kind of texts people send when they want the wounded person to comfort the people who caused the wound. I slid into my seat and closed the door gently, the way you close a church door behind you when you don't want the world to hear your grief. The inside of my car still held the faint smell of the hospital, clean and sharp, with something underneath that reminded me of panic. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time since I'd stepped through those wedding doors, my throat tightened enough that I had to swallow twice. I thought about the little boy's breath coming back late, like life had been forced to fight for him. I thought about his mother's hands shaking as she tried to hold him steady in my back seat. I thought about the way she had looked at me in that hallway, like I was a miracle and a risk at the same time. And I remembered the moment, earlier, when the paperwork had been pushed toward me and the world had asked me to decide whether I was willing to be responsible for something that wasn't mine. I remembered signing, not because I was rich, not because I wanted credit, but because I couldn't stand there and let that child slip away while grown folks argued over rules. Before I left the hospital, when the boy's breathing had finally steadied and his mother's shoulders had stopped shaking enough for her to stand, I had pulled a receipt from my purse, flipped it over, and written my address on the back. My hand had been steady then, too. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something in her eyes that told me her life wasn't just poor, it was unsafe. She had tried to thank me and couldn't find the right words, so I'd pressed the paper into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "If you ever need to reach me," I had told her quietly, "this is where I live." She had stared at the numbers like they were a lifeline she didn't deserve. She didn't ask what I was heading to. She didn't ask why I was dressed like that. She just nodded like she was afraid the world would snatch kindness away if she spoke too much. Sitting in my car now, outside my own daughter's wedding, I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired. I felt embarrassed in a way that had nothing to do with what Cedric said and everything to do with what my daughter agreed to. I drove away without music, without tears, without calling anyone to witness it. I went home and did the things you do when you don't want your pain to become public. Washed my hands, changed out of my dress, folded it carefully like it hadn't been worn for war. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall until my eyes burned, waiting for something to make it make sense. Night came without answers. The hospital didn't soften just because the child had survived the worst part. It never does. The moment the crisis stops looking dramatic, the rules come back like they were waiting behind the door. The fluorescent lights stayed the same. The chairs stayed hard. The air stayed sharp enough to sting the back of your throat. Janelle sat in a plastic chair outside the room, knees pulled close, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together while her child slept under machines that hummed without emotion. She hadn't changed clothes. Her hair was still pulled back in a tired knot. Her eyes were red, but not from crying anymore, more like from refusing to close. A nurse came out with a clipboard and that look hospitals get when they're done being urgent and ready to be official. "Ma'am," she said, voice not cruel but not warm either. "We need to confirm who has legal authority to make decisions for the child if anything changes." Janelle's face tightened. She glanced toward the room's small window where she could see the outline of her child's blanket rising and falling. That rise and fall was the only proof she had that the world hadn't already stolen everything. "I'm his mother," she said quietly. "Yes," the nurse replied, and paused just long enough for the word to feel like it wasn't enough. "We still need documentation. Identification. Next of kin contact. Someone we can reach if we need consent fast." Janelle swallowed. Her fingers pressed into her own palm, hard, like she was trying to remind herself that she was still here. "I don't have," she began, then stopped. She didn't finish because finishing would make it sound like she was admitting guilt instead of telling the truth. The nurse's eyes dipped to Janelle's hands, then back up, measuring. A doctor walked by, glanced into the room, and kept moving. 2 security guards stood farther down the hall, not staring at her exactly, but not watching either. That was the part nobody says out loud. In hospitals, poor people are always suspected of being trouble before they're treated like family. Janelle's voice came out thinner. "He's sleeping," she said, as if sleep could protect him from paperwork. Please don't make me." She stopped again. Her throat worked. Her shoulders lifted and fell in a breath that looked painful. The nurse softened just a fraction, but it wasn't sympathy, it was practicality. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad," she said. "I'm trying to make sure we can move quickly if we have to. If he needs something and we can't reach anyone, it slows everything down." That last sentence landed. Slows everything down. Janelle stared at the floor like she was watching her whole life move in slow motion. Every door that closed, every hand that took, every time she tried to speak and was told she didn't have the right to. She turned her face slightly away from the nurse and covered her mouth with her hand, not crying, just fighting the urge to fall apart in front of strangers. A different staff member approached an older woman with tired eyes and a badge clipped to her cardigan. She didn't ask questions like she was gathering information. She asked, like she was giving Janelle one last chance to choose. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "who can we call for you?" Janelle's eyes flicked to the room again. Her child shifted under the blanket, a small movement that should have been normal but looked like a warning. Something in her expression changed fear, turning into decision. Not confidence, just desperation strong enough to push past shame. She reached into her bag and pulled out a torn piece of paper, flattened and refolded so many times it looked like it had been carried like a secret. It wasn't an ID. It wasn't money. It was a number scribbled in old ink, smudged at the edges. She stared at it as if reading it would hurt. Then she closed her eyes for half a second and spoke. "Edwin Marlowe," she said. Not loudly, not proudly, like someone opening a door she had been taught to keep shut. The older woman behind the badge didn't react the way the nurse had. She reacted the way people do when they hear a name they recognize but don't want to show it. Her shoulders straightened, her mouth tightened into something careful. She repeated it once, slower. "Edwin Marlowe." Janelle nodded, lips pressed together, eyes glassy but steady. She didn't explain. She didn't offer a story. She just held the number out like a last match in the rain. The staff member took it and disappeared down the hall without another word. Minutes passed in a strange, stretched silence. Janelle didn't sit back down. She stood near the doorway, with her hand resting on the frame, not going in, not stepping away, watching the child's chest rise and fall like she was counting. Every so often she rubbed her thumb over her knuckles the way people do when they're trying to stop themselves from trembling. Then the tone of the hallway shifted, not with shouting, not with sirens, but with small changes that meant something. A nurse walked faster. A doctor came back and spoke in a lowered voice to someone at the desk. The older staff member returned with a cordless phone in her hand, held carefully like it mattered. She didn't hand it to Janelle right away. She looked at her first, eyes steady. "They answered," she said. Janelle's breath caught. She took the phone with both hands, stared at the screen like it was a mirror, and pressed it to her ear. She didn't speak immediately. When she did, her voice was barely there. "Daddy," she whispered, and the word sounded both familiar and forbidden. Down the hall, one of the security guards shifted position, suddenly more alert than bored. A man in a suit I hadn't noticed before stepped out of an elevator and glanced toward the nurse's desk. Nobody announced anything. Nobody made a scene. But the air changed the way it changes when money and influence enter a place quietly. Power began to move, quietly. I didn't see Edwin Marlowe arrive, not with my own eyes. I was home by then, sitting in a quiet house that felt too large for one woman's breath. I only learned what happened because events like that don't stay private for long, not in a hospital, not in a hallway where people trade stories the way they trade coffee. The next morning, a woman from my church who worked near the nurses' station called me and said, "Bridget, something happened last night at that hospital." Her voice was low, not gossiping, just stunned. "That lady you brought in? That wasn't just any lady. She didn't give me names right away. She didn't have to." The way she said it tight, careful, told me it was the kind of information that changes how you remember a person's face. According to her, the father didn't burst in like the movies. No sirens, no shouting, no public display. Authority doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives so calmly the room only notices after it has already rearranged itself around it. A man in a dark coat stepped out of an elevator with two other men beside him, all of them moving like they knew exactly where they were going. Not rushing, not strolling, just certain. Their shoes didn't squeak. Their voices stayed low. People made space without being told. Nurses straightened their shoulders. Security shifted to attention. An older doctor, the one with the tired eyes, appeared again like he'd been summoned. And then Edwin Marlowe walked out of the elevator last. He wasn't flashy. That was what struck everyone. He looked like a man who had spent his life having rooms quiet down when he entered them, so he no longer needed to demand it. His hair was silver at the edges. His face held age the way old leather does, creased, solid, expensive, without trying. He didn't scan the room searching for importance. He already was. He asked one question at the desk, and the desk clerk didn't answer him the way she answered regular people. She answered him like her job depended on the tone of her voice. "Where is my daughter?" he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. but everyone heard it. Janelle came out of the room with her hands still shaking, her eyes fixed on her child's bed like she was afraid turning her head would make him disappear. When she saw her father, she stopped in the doorway. She didn't run to him. She didn't collapse into his arms. She stood there like a woman, trying to remember what it feels like to be safe in front of the person who once represented safety. Edwin's face changed when he saw her not soft, not warm, but cracked, just slightly. Like he'd been holding himself together with a lie and it finally snapped. "Janelle," he said, and his voice made her name sound like it had been carried a long way. She lifted her chin. Her voice was thin. "He's alive," she whispered, and even that sounded like she wasn't fully trusting it. Edwin stepped closer to the room's window and looked in at his grandchild, small and still under the warmed blanket. One of the men with Edwin spoke quietly to the nurse, and suddenly people were moving with a new kind of urgency, calm but fast. A private doctor was requested. A social worker appeared. A bag of supplies showed up like it had been waiting in a car. Still no spectacle, just systems shifting. The hospital didn't become kinder, it became careful. Edwin turned back to Janelle, and for a moment he said nothing. Silence between parents and children is never empty. It's filled with everything both sides are too proud, too hurt, too exhausted to say. Janelle's fingers pressed into her sleeve so hard her knuckles went pale. Her eyes moved around the hallway, not looking at him directly, like she was still waiting for someone to snatch her away for speaking his name. Edwin spoke again, voice controlled. "Where have you been?" Janelle swallowed. She didn't answer with a speech. She answered with pieces, a sentence at a time, the way trauma comes out when a person is trying not to drown in it. "I was married," she said, as if even saying that much was dangerous. Edwin's jaw tightened. One of the men beside him shifted, eyes narrowing like he was listening for names he already suspected. Janelle continued, voice trembling but steady enough to hold. "They took my papers, my phone, everything." She looked down at her hands like she could still feel things being pulled away. "They said I didn't deserve it," they said. "Nobody would believe me." Edwin's eyes didn't widen. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why she stayed. He asked the only question that mattered in that moment. "Who did this to you?" Janelle's throat worked. Fear flashed across her face, not fear of her father, but fear of what saying the truth might summon. "He has people," she whispered. "They had me watched. They told me if I tried to reach you, you'd think I was lying. They made you think I ran off." She swallowed hard, and the words came out like poison she'd been forced to hold. "They kept me from you." Edwin's expression went still in a way that wasn't calm. It was controlled rage, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that writes checks and signs papers and ends lives quietly. He looked at the nurse's station, then at the security guards, then back at his daughter. "You are here now," he said, and it sounded less like comfort and more like an order to the universe. Janelle's eyes finally filled. She nodded once, and her shoulders sagged just enough to show she had been carrying this alone for too long. A nurse approached with a note. Edwin read it without blinking. When he finished, he looked up. "Who brought her in?" he asked. "An older woman," the nurse said carefully. "She stopped for them. She signed. She paid." She hesitated, then added, "She left an address." Edwin's gaze sharpened. "Find her," he said. The nurse nodded quickly, already moving. Edwin turned back to Janelle, voice quiet now, almost tender in its certainty. "We will find the woman who saved you." Morning came too clean for how the night had ended. The kind of morning that makes you feel foolish for being wounded because sunlight has no respect for what happened in the dark. I woke up with my jaw tight and my throat sore, like I'd been holding words in my mouth all night without letting them out. My dress was folded on the chair where I'd placed it with careful hands, the way you set down something precious even after it's been disrespected. I stood in my kitchen and stared at the sink a long time before I turned the tap on, letting the water run just to have a sound that belonged to me. My phone sat face down on the counter. I didn't pick it up right away. The last thing I wanted was to read a message from my daughter that tried to turn last night into my fault. When I finally flipped it over, the screen lit with missed calls and short texts. Cedric's name showed up more than once. Talia's message was there too. Still no, Mom. Still no softness. Just, we need to talk. Like what they had done was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over if I agreed to stop being hurt. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I hadn't done the night before. I went back in my mind to that hospital hallway and replayed the details that had seemed small at the time but now felt sharp. The way the mother Janelle had flinched when staff asked for identification. The way her eyes kept scanning the corridor like she expected someone to appear and drag her away. The way she had spoken her father's name like it could hurt her to say it. Edwin Marlowe. I still didn't know that name in a personal way, but I knew what power sounded like even when it whispered. I had seen the staff shift. I had seen the guard straighten. I had felt how quickly people become helpful when the right person is listening. That woman had been scared in a way that went beyond being poor. And I had given her my address. It hadn't felt like a decision at the time. It had felt like reflex. But in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized I had done it because something in her eyes told me she wasn't just stranded, she was hunted. She had held onto that paper like it was the only thing on earth that couldn't be taken from her. I remembered her nod, small and urgent, as if she was afraid kindness would vanish if she moved too loudly. I set my phone down again, heart beating slower but heavier, and I tried to imagine where she was now, whether her child was still breathing steady, whether she'd slept at all, whether she was still sitting upright in that plastic chair with her eyes locked on the rise and fall of his blanket. I thought about the people who watched her in that hallway, the way some eyes didn't feel like concern. I thought about the question Edwin had asked through other people who did this to you, and how Janelle had looked like the answer would bring danger into the room. I didn't know then that her danger had a name I would recognize soon enough. I didn't know she had been married once. I didn't know the man who humiliated me with a microphone had already made a habit out of erasing women. All I knew was that the story didn't feel finished. It felt like I had stepped into the middle of something old and ugly without even realizing it. Back at the hospital, the morning didn't come clean at all. It came heavy. Edwin Marlowe sat in a private consultation room, the kind hospitals save for families with money or influence. The walls were the same bland color as every other room, but everything around him moved differently. Phones answered faster, voices lowered, doorways cleared without him having to ask. Janelle sat across from him, shoulders tight, hands clasped together so hard her fingers were pale. She still didn't look like somebody who had once belonged to wealth. She looked like somebody who had survived the loss of it. Her eyes kept cutting toward the door, not because she expected her father to leave, but because she expected the past to walk in. Edwin's voice stayed calm. That calm wasn't gentle, it was controlled. "The nurse said a woman brought you in," he said. "She paid and she signed." Janelle nodded. "She didn't have to," she whispered. She stopped. Edwin's gaze stayed on his daughter's face, like he was reading what she wasn't saying. "Did she tell you anything about herself?" Janelle shook her head. "No, she didn't talk much. She just moved." Her eyes softened for the first time in hours. She wrote her address down. Told me if I ever needed her, I could reach her. Edwin held his silence a moment. When he finally spoke, his words carried weight. "People don't stop like that anymore," he said. "Not unless they're built a certain way." Janelle swallowed, and her voice came out small. I didn't know where else to turn. Edwin leaned back slightly, jaw tight. "You turned to the right place," he said, and the room went quiet again, but not empty. The kind of quiet that happens right before decisions. He looked to one of the men standing near the wall, someone who hadn't introduced himself, who didn't need to. "That address," Edwin said. "We go today." Janelle's eyes widened a fraction. "Daddy." The word held fear, not for herself, but for the woman who had helped her. "She doesn't know any of this," Janelle said. "She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know what she stepped into." Edwin's gaze sharpened. "Then we make sure she's protected," he said, voice steady. "We owe her that." Janelle's shoulders sagged with relief that looked like exhaustion. She never knew I was headed nowhere, she murmured, almost to herself. She never knew she was late for anything. Edwin stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make announcements. He simply moved, and the room moved with him. "We'll find her," he said. Then he paused at the door and added, "Quiet and absolute. And we'll find the people who did this to you." Outside the room, phones started ringing. Names were spoken softly. Instructions were given without drama. The kind of preparation that doesn't look like revenge until it arrives at your front door. The convoy was ordered. I didn't sleep much, not because I was tossing and turning, but because my body stayed too still, like it didn't trust rest. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling while the house breathed around me, pipes settling, distant cars passing, the soft tick of a clock that sounded louder than it should. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cedric smile at that microphone. Every time I opened them, I remembered my daughter's voice telling me where to sit like I was an inconvenience, instead of the woman who raised her. By morning, I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry the way people expect you to be. I was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, like something in me had stepped back and started watching. I moved through my morning slow and steady coffee, a rinse of my face, my robe tied snug at my waist. I didn't put on music. I didn't turn on the television. Noise felt like it belonged to other people's lives. My phone stayed on the counter, screen dark. I could still hear the words they'd used, and I didn't need fresh ones stacked on top. I took a sip of coffee and stood by my living room window, looking out at my street like I was waiting for something without knowing what. That was when the first SUV turned the corner. It rolled down the street smooth and quiet, windows dark, moving like it had a purpose. I watched it pass my neighbor's mailbox and slow. Another SUV followed it, then another 10 in total, each one black, each one identical enough to look planned, not accidental. No horns, no flashing lights, no loud engines revving for attention. Just a line of heavy vehicles arriving like a sentence being written across the pavement. My hand tightened around my mug before I even realized it. My first thought wasn't money or danger. My first thought was, something happened at that hospital. A curtain twitched across the street. I saw my neighbor's face appear in her window for a second, then disappear. On my porch, the wind chime moved gently like it didn't understand what was pulling into our quiet little block. The SUVs parked along the curb with careful precision, close enough to feel intentional, far enough to avoid looking like a raid. The kind of spacing people use when they don't want to scare you, but they want you to understand they could. My heartbeat stayed controlled, but my skin went cold. A man stepped out of the first vehicle, not in a uniform, not announcing anything, just scanning the area with calm eyes. Another man exited and spoke quietly into an earpiece. Doors opened down the line in a sequence that felt practiced. Not loud, not dramatic, efficient. That efficiency did something to me. It told me this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a wrong address. This was directed. Then I saw her. The woman I had lifted from the roadside stepped out of one of the middle SUVs, and for a moment my mind refused to accept it because she did not look like the same person. Yesterday, she was shaking with a dying child in her lap, eyes wild with panic, clothes wrinkled, face bare and exhausted. Today, she stood upright. Her hair was smoothed back. Her clothes were clean and simple, still not flashy, but chosen. Her eyes were still tired, but the fear in them had shifted into something steadier, something held. She looked like a woman who had been reminded that she belonged somewhere. She took one step onto the pavement and paused, as if she was letting herself believe she was really here. Then she looked up at my house. When her gaze landed on my front window, it locked. Recognition lit her face, not joy, not relief exactly, more like gratitude tied so tightly to something heavy it couldn't float. Behind her, another door opened. An older man stepped out slowly, like he had no reason to hurry and no need to prove anything. He wore a dark coat, crisp and plain, the kind that costs more because it doesn't need decoration. His posture wasn't stiff, it was settled. He looked around once, not with suspicion, but with the calm of someone used to being watched. His hair was silver at the edges, his face composed in a way that told me he had practiced restraint for years. He didn't look at the SUVs like they impressed him. They looked like they belonged to him, the way the sky belongs to the weather. Janelle turned toward him briefly and said something I couldn't hear. He nodded once, eyes never leaving my house. Then he walked forward beside her, and the men around them moved with quiet coordination, forming a loose perimeter without making it obvious. Not a show, a shield. I set my mug down slowly on the windowsill. My fingers were steady, but my throat felt tight. Not with fear, more with the sudden realization that a decision I made without anyone watching had been seen by somebody who mattered. I took one step back from the window, then another, like I needed distance from the sight to think. The doorbell didn't ring right away. They didn't rush my porch. They waited in that polite way powerful people wait when they expect you to come to them. Janelle started up my walkway first, eyes fixed on the ground for a second, then lifting like she was bracing herself to face me. Her father followed at a respectful distance, hands relaxed at his sides. I watched them through the glass, my heart beating steady but loud in my ears, trying to understand what kind of gratitude arrives with 10 SUVs. And then, across the street, I heard the soft crunch of tires slowing down. I turned my head slightly and saw a familiar car roll to a near stop at the curb, just far enough away to pretend it was passing through. The driver didn't get out, but I felt the attention like a finger pointed at my door. A familiar car slowed across the way. I didn't open the door right away, not because I was afraid, but because I needed one clean second to decide who I was going to be when I did. 10 SUVs on my street was not a small thing. Janelle standing on her feet like she belonged to daylight again was not a small thing. And the man behind her, calm, silver-edged, dressed plain but expensive, carried the kind of quiet authority that makes people straighten their backs without realizing they're doing it. I stepped away from the window, walked to my front door, and placed my hand on the knob like I was grounding myself. My house was modest, but it was mine. My name was mine. My dignity was mine. Whatever they were bringing to my porch, they would not take those. When I opened the door, the morning air rushed in cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and car exhaust, and something sharper anticipation. Janelle stood at the bottom of my steps. She didn't smile. Her eyes looked like they had been through too much sleep deprivation to perform gratitude. She just stared at me the way people stare at someone who saw them at their lowest and didn't turn away. Behind her, the older man waited one step back, giving her space while also making it clear she wasn't alone anymore. "Ma'am," Janelle said softly, and her voice trembled on the edge of a breakdown she was holding back with both hands. "It's you." I nodded once. "You and your baby?" I didn't finish the sentence because I didn't want to invite tragedy into my doorway. She understood anyway. She swallowed and nodded quickly. "He's breathing good now," she whispered. They said he'll make it." Her eyes shone for 1 second like relief wanted to spill out. Then she pressed her lips together again, controlling it. The older man stepped forward then, not into my space, just close enough to be heard without raising his voice. He looked at me like he was seeing more than my face, like he was seeing the kind of person who stops for suffering without needing a reason. He said my name like it mattered. "Bridget Kincaid," he said, and the way he pronounced it slow, certain made my stomach tighten. It told me he didn't guess. He knew. Someone had said it to him with confidence. I lifted my chin slightly. "Yes," I replied, because I wasn't going to ask how he knew. Asking would have given him permission to explain himself like I was the one seeking approval. I wasn't. He held my gaze. His eyes were steady, not warm, not cold, measured. The kind of eyes that have watched people lie and watched paperwork prove the truth. "We are looking for the woman who saved my daughter and my grandchild," he said. His voice was even, but the words carried weight. Not the weight of drama, the weight of a debt. For a second, I didn't respond. I looked at Janelle again, and in her face, I saw yesterday, the roadside panic, the terror of being refused. The way she had clutched that child like the world was trying to steal him. Today, she stood straighter. There was still damage in her eyes, but there was also protection behind her now, like a wall she didn't have to build alone anymore. "I didn't do anything special," I said, because that's what women like me say even when we've done something that could have changed a life. We don't call it heroism, we call it what was right. Edwin Marlowe shook his head once. Not disagreement, correction. "You did what most people don't," he said. "You stopped." He paused, then added, "I'm Edwin Marlowe." The name landed in my chest like a stone. Not because I knew him personally, but because I had felt the way the hospital shifted when it was spoken. I understood then why the air around him seemed to rearrange itself. Janelle's eyes dropped for a second, like she was still getting used to her father being real again. Edwin didn't touch her. He didn't put an arm around her or kiss her forehead. That would have been for an audience. This wasn't about performance. This was about repair, and repair starts with respect. He looked back at me. "My daughter told me what happened," he said. "She told me you signed when she couldn't. You paid when she couldn't. You left your address when you didn't have to." His tone stayed calm, but I heard something underneath it, anger, that she had been in a position where a stranger had to become her lifeline. I felt my throat tighten. Not from emotion alone, but from the collision of two truths. My daughter had humiliated me in public, and this man, a stranger, stood on my porch speaking gratitude into my name like I was worthy of honor. The contrast was so sharp it almost made me laugh, but there was no humor in it. Edwin reached into his coat slowly, and my body tensed out of instinct. He pulled out, "Nothing dangerous, just a folded card." He held it out to me without stepping closer, letting me decide the distance. "If you need anything," he said, "you call that number, day or night." I didn't take it right away. I stared at it, then at him. "Why?" I asked quietly. Not suspicious, just clear. "People don't usually come back." Edwin's gaze didn't waver. "Because my daughter and my grandchild are alive," he said, as if that answered everything. Then he added, voice lower, "and because there are things my daughter has told me that concern me." Janelle's shoulders tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the street for a quick second, like she was still afraid the past could appear in broad daylight. I felt the hair at the back of my neck rise, not from fear, but from awareness. Something bigger was sitting under this gratitude, something heavy and unfinished. Before I could say anything else, I heard a door open across the way. A neighbor stepped onto their porch, eyes wide, pretending to adjust a plant while watching every movement. Then, from farther down the street, a man's voice carried low, familiar, calling my name like he had business with me. My chest tightened. That voice didn't belong on this street at this moment. It belonged to last night. Someone recognized them before I did. The voice came again, closer this time, carrying that same easy confidence like the street belonged to him. "Bridget." "Not ma'am. Not Mrs. Kincaid. Just my name," said the way people say it when they believe familiarity gives them control. I didn't turn immediately. I kept my eyes on Edwin Marlowe, on the card still held out between us, on Janelle's tightened shoulders. Something inside me had already started to count the seconds, the way it does when danger walks in wearing a smile. Then footsteps climbed my walkway. Cedric Westbrook appeared at the edge of my porch, dressed too well for a casual morning, hair neat, shoulders squared like he had rehearsed his posture in the mirror. He looked like a man who had slept fine the night after humiliating an older woman in public. His smile was already forming before he even saw what I was looking at. He glanced at me first, eyes bright, voice light, like nothing had happened. "There you are," he said, as if I'd wandered off and caused a minor inconvenience. "Talia's been calling. You just left." He chuckled softly, trying to wrap my pain in a joke again. His gaze slid past me toward the street, and he paused, not because he saw the SUVs, but because he recognized the energy that came with them. His smile tightened at the corners. Edwin didn't move. He didn't step forward to assert himself. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Cedric with a stillness that made Cedric's confidence falter by half a degree. Janelle stayed 2 steps behind her father, half in shadow, like she was letting the moment choose its own timing. Cedric's eyes swept the line of black vehicles, the men standing around them, the calm precision of their spacing. He tried to smooth his expression into polite curiosity. "Is everything okay?" he asked, voice still pleasant, but his throat worked a little harder than it had before. He looked at me again, as if expecting me to explain. "Bridget, what is this?" I didn't answer. I didn't know him words. Cedric stepped closer, stopping at the bottom step like he was deciding how to enter a space that no longer belonged to him. His gaze moved again, quicker now, searching faces, trying to gaze into, to find the owner of the situation. His eyes landed on Edwin, and for a brief moment his body stiffened. Not fear. Calculation, like he was trying to identify a threat before it identified him. "Sir," Cedric said, tone respectful, cautious, the voice men use when they don't know how much power someone has, but suspect it's more than theirs. He extended his hand slightly, not fully offering it. "I'm Cedric Westbrook. Bridget is my..." He hesitated, then corrected quickly. "My wife's mother." That sentence did something to me. Not because it was wrong, but because of how quickly he had used my daughter as a shield. Edwin didn't take Cedric's hand. He didn't insult him either. He simply let the silence make the point. Cedric's fingers hovered, then lowered, and he tried to keep his smile alive. The smile began to sweat. Then Cedric's eyes shifted again. They moved past Edwin's shoulder, past the men standing quiet around the SUVs, and landed on Janelle. At first, his face didn't change. It couldn't. His mind needed a second to believe what his eyes were seeing. Janelle stood still, hair pulled back, clean and upright, her expression controlled in the way people become controlled after they've survived humiliation for too long. She wasn't trembling anymore. She wasn't begging. She wasn't broken on a roadside. She was standing. Cedric blinked once, slow, then again, faster. His mouth opened slightly as if a word tried to escape and got stuck in his throat. The color drained from his face in a way that wasn't dramatic. It was physical, real, as if his blood had decided to abandon him first. "No," he whispered. The word came out by itself, not to anyone, not as a denial in conversation, just a reflex, a man's body reacting before his pride could put a mask on it. Janelle didn't speak. She didn't step forward. She didn't point at him. She didn't accuse. Her silence was heavier than any shout. She simply held his gaze, and in her eyes Cedric saw the life he had erased, papers taken, name buried, a child's needs ignored, a woman pushed into the margins so completely that strangers stopped for her instead of family. Cedric's knees softened. He gripped the porch railing with one hand, trying to keep his body from betraying him in front of everybody. His other hand lifted slightly, palm out, as if he could pause the moment like a video. His lips moved again, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked to Edwin then, and whatever he saw there finished the job. Recognition struck Cedric's face like a slap. Edwin wasn't just a father. Edwin was a father Cedric had been protected from by lies, by distance, by the confidence that Janelle would never dare open that door again. Cedric's breathing turned shallow. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. Sweat appeared at his hairline. He tried to take a step back, but his heel caught the edge of the step. His body wobbled. For 1 second, he looked at me quick, desperate, like he wanted me to save him the way I had saved that child, like he wanted the same mercy he had denied others. I didn't move. His eyes rolled slightly, not theatrically, just enough to show his nervous system had reached its limit. His grip slipped from the railing. His knees folded. And Cedric Westbrook went down hard on my porch, collapsing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Janelle exhaled once, slow and controlled, as if she had been holding her breath since the day he first erased her. I stood over the scene, watching the men near the SUVs step forward with the calm readiness of people trained to handle emergencies without panic. Edwin didn't rush to Cedric. He didn't gloat. He simply looked down at him with a quiet, final stare that said, "You can't run from what you did forever." The truth had arrived. Cedric came to on my porch like his body regretted saving him. One of the men from the street knelt beside him, not hovering, not panicking, just checking his pulse with the calm of someone trained to keep emotions out of emergencies. Cedric's eyelids fluttered, his throat worked, and when he finally inhaled fully, he did it like a man waking up into consequences. He tried to sit up too quickly, then slowed when he realized how many eyes were on him and how little control he had left. His gaze flicked to me first, instinctively, like he still believed my porch belonged to him by marriage. Then he saw Janelle again, and the blood drained right back out of his face. "No," he muttered, voice hoarse. This is crazy." Edwin Marlowe didn't respond to the panic. He responded to the facts. He turned slightly, and one of the men beside him stepped forward with a slim folder tucked under his arm. Another held a tablet. Another held a sealed envelope. None of them looked excited. They looked prepared. That's the difference between anger and authority. Anger wants to explode. Authority wants to document. Janelle stood still, hands clasped in front of her, chin lifted. If you didn't know what she had survived, you might have thought she was calm by nature. But I could see it in her shoulders, the tightness, the restraint, the way her chest rose and fell like she was pacing herself through a memory she couldn't outrun. Cedric's eyes moved from face to face, searching for an ally, a misunderstanding, a way to turn the room back into his stage. "Bridget," he started, using my name like a rope he could grab. "You don't know what this is. She's not." His voice cracked and he swallowed hard, trying to regain the smooth tone he used at microphones. "This woman is lying. She's always been—" He stopped when Janelle's expression didn't shift an inch. His body seemed to remember something his mouth didn't want to admit. Edwin lifted a hand, not to silence him with force, but to signal that Cedric's words were not needed. "We are not here to argue," Edwin said. His voice stayed low, controlled. "We are here to correct." One of Edwin's men opened the folder and placed a stack of papers on the small porch table by my door, the one I normally used for packages. Seeing official documents on that table made my stomach tighten, like my home had been pulled into a courtroom without my permission. The man tapped the top page once, polite as a librarian, and slid it forward. Cedric leaned in, squinting like he couldn't read consequences. When his eyes landed on the heading, his lips pressed together. He looked up fast, then back down, like he was hoping the words would change if he stared hard enough. Janelle spoke for the first time, and her voice was quiet but sharp. "That's the deed," she said. Cedric snapped his head toward her. "You don't have—" "You filed it," Janelle cut in softly. "No yelling, no shaking. In my name at first, then you changed it." Cedric's mouth opened, but Edwin's man calmly slid another page on top, an old copy, then a newer one, the differences highlighted. Not with flashy marks, just clean evidence. "You transferred property that was not yours," Edwin said. "You did it while my daughter had no access to her identification, while she had no phone, while she had no way to challenge it." Cedric's breathing quickened. He glanced at me again. "Bridget, you gotta understand," he pleaded, the same man who had called me a burden now asking for mercy like it was his right. "She left. She disappeared. She abandoned." Janelle's jaw tightened. "I didn't disappear," she said. "You erased me." That sentence landed like a gavel. I felt it in my chest, not because I knew her story in detail, but because I recognized the way men rewrite women when it benefits them. I thought of my daughter's voice telling me where to sit. I thought of Cedric's smile. I thought of how easy it is for a room to accept a narrative as long as it sounds confident enough. Edwin's man opened the envelope and laid out copies of bank statements and account summaries, just enough to show patterns without turning my porch into a lecture. Cedric stared at the papers like they were snakes. "Those are private," he snapped, trying to regain control by pretending outrage. "You can't." Edwin's gaze didn't move. "They were obtained legally," he said, and left it at that. He didn't explain how. He didn't need to. The point wasn't to impress Cedric. The point was to end him. Janelle's voice stayed steady. You opened accounts using information you took from me, she said. You drained what I had, then told me I was crazy for asking where it went. Cedric shook his head hard. I did not. His voice rose slightly, then he caught himself, remembering where he was and who was standing there. He lowered it again, trying to sound reasonable. I was trying to protect my family. You were unstable. You were making threats. You weren't fit to... Edwin stepped forward half a pace, not close enough to touch him, close enough to make Cedric feel the weight of a man who had been kept away by lies. My daughter was kept from me, Edwin said quietly. My grandchild nearly died because she had no access to help. And you, he paused, letting the words sharpen, have built your life on theft and silence. Cedric's eyes darted toward the street like he was calculating escape routes. Then he looked at me again, desperate now. Tell them, he whispered. Tell them I'm not. I didn't speak. I had learned something about my child in that wedding hall. Now I was learning something about the man she married. The pattern was clear, and patterns don't need speeches. Edwin nodded once to the man with the folder. The man turned slightly and addressed Cedric with the calm tone of someone who had already decided the next steps. You will be served, he said, and the documentation will be filed today. Cedric's face twisted. This is insane, he breathed. Edwin's voice stayed quiet, final. No, he said, this is overdue. The man looked at Cedric, then at Edwin, then back to Cedric, as if sealing the moment with words that didn't flinch. This will go to court. Talia didn't come to my house like a bride. She came like a woman whose fantasy had been ripped open and left bleeding on the floor. When she knocked, it wasn't the light, polite knock she used when she wanted to keep things pretty. It was uneven, 2 quick taps, then a pause, then another, like her hands couldn't decide whether she deserved to be let in. I opened the door and saw her standing on my porch with her hair pulled back too tight, her eyes swollen and dry at the same time, as if she had cried until her body refused to give her any more water. She didn't wear her ring. That was the first thing I noticed, not out of petty satisfaction, out of clarity. A ring is more than jewelry. It's a decision. When she stood there with bare fingers, it told me she had already crossed a line she hadn't told herself she could cross yet. Mom, she said, and my stomach tightened because it was the first time she'd said it like it meant something since the wedding. I didn't step aside immediately. I didn't block her either. I waited, letting her feel what it meant to stand on the outside of a door. She swallowed hard, eyes dropping for half a second, then lifting again with a nervous kind of courage. I didn't know, she whispered. I stared at her. You didn't know what? I asked, voice calm, not sharp. Calm is sharper when you mean it. She flinched slightly, like she wanted me to make it easy for her. About him, she said, her voice trembled. About any of it. I stepped back and let her in. Not because she had earned comfort, but because I needed to see her face up close when she tried to turn choices into accidents. She walked into my living room like she didn't recognize it anymore, like my home had become a place where she might be judged instead of nurtured. She stood near the couch and didn't sit. Her hands hovered at her sides, opening and closing slowly, the way people do when their bodies are still running on adrenaline. I went to his parents' house, she said quickly, words rushing like she had rehearsed them on the drive over. I confronted them. They acted like I was crazy. She blinked fast, eyes glossy. Then his phone started blowing up. Numbers he didn't save, messages. He tried to snatch it away from me. That hit me in the chest because I could picture it too clearly. Cedric's smooth smile collapsing into panic. The same man who had held a microphone like a weapon, now trying to hide a screen like a guilty child. Talia's voice cracked. I saw a name, she whispered. Janelle? I didn't react outwardly. Inside, something settled. So that was how she learned, not from Cedric's honesty, from his fear. She was his wife, Talia said, and the words tasted bitter in her mouth. He told me he was never married. He told me you were just dramatic, that you overreact to everything. Her eyes lifted to mine, and shame flickered across her face. He told me you'd ruin my day if I let you get close. I held her gaze. And you believed him, I said. Talia's shoulders sagged like the sentence had weight. I wanted to, she admitted. I wanted him to be right. Her voice went smaller. He made me feel like I had finally made it. Like I had been chosen. That was the truth she didn't want to say. It wasn't only manipulation. It was hunger. Hunger for a life that looked impressive enough to silence every insecurity she had ever carried. Cedric fed that hunger and used it as a leash. Talia's fingers trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder, papers, screenshots, a few printed pages. She placed it on my coffee table like it burned her palms. He's been taking money, she whispered, not just wedding expenses. He opened something in my name. Her eyes filled again, this time with rage. He said it was for us, for the future. She shook her head hard. It wasn't. He was bleeding me, quietly, the way he did her. I stared at the folder but didn't open it. I didn't need the details to understand the pattern. Cedric didn't marry women, he acquired them. Talia's voice broke fully then. Mom, I'm sorry. She stepped closer, eyes pleading now. I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't. She swallowed, and her next words came out shaky. Please forgive me. I watched her face, the tears finally falling, the mascara threatening to run, her pride cracking in real time. It would have been easy to soften. Easy to reach for her the way mothers do when their child cries. But something inside me had changed on that wedding day. I had learned what she was willing to do when she believed the room mattered more than my dignity. I spoke slowly, voice steady, letting each word land where it belonged. Forgiveness does not cancel what you chose to do when you thought no one important was watching. Talia's breath hitched. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to say she was important too. But she didn't. She couldn't. The truth was too loud now. I'm not telling you I'll never forgive you, I continued, quieter. I'm telling you you don't get to rush it. I stepped closer, not to comfort her, but to make sure she heard me without misunderstanding. You stood in front of a room full of people and told your mother where to sit. You let your husband call me a burden like it was funny. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You don't get to skip the part where you feel what that did. Talia sobbed once, sharp, like the sound surprised her. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed by her own tears. What do I do? She whispered. I held her gaze, and in that moment, I was not the woman begging for a place. I was the woman deciding what accountability looks like. You will sit with what you did, I said, voice low and final. The weeks that followed didn't feel like victory. They felt like correction, like a crooked picture finally being straightened, not with one dramatic slam, but with hands that knew exactly where to press. Cedric's fainting spell on my porch became the last time he controlled a room. After that, everything moved the way truth moves, when it has receipts behind it, quiet at first, then unavoidable. There were meetings I didn't attend, and phone calls I didn't sit in on, because I didn't need to hear men argue over what documents already proved. I only needed to watch what happened to the people I cared about when the lies stopped protecting the liar. Janelle didn't become fine overnight. That's not how fear leaves a body. Even after her child was discharged, even after Edwin's people made sure they had a safe place to sleep, she still startled at sudden sounds. She still checked the window before she opened a door. Some nights she called me not to talk about Cedric, not to talk about court, but just to hear a steady voice on the other side. When you've been erased, you need proof you still exist. I gave her that proof when I could. Edwin didn't handle his anger the way poor men do, with noise. He handled it with structure. A lawyer was assigned not a showy one, not the kind that performs on television, but the kind that reads every line until it bleeds. The property that had been shifted and renamed began to shift back. Not magically, not quickly, step by step, through filings and signed statements, and people suddenly willing to tell the truth once they realized Edwin Marlowe wasn't going away. Cedric's family tried denial first. Then they tried charm. Then they tried blame. Each attempt died the same way on paper. The part that mattered most to me wasn't the property, though. It was watching Janelle hold her child without that frantic terror in her fingers. It was hearing a doctor say, calmly, that the boy would need follow-ups, but that he wasn't teetering on the edge anymore. It was seeing Janelle's shoulders lower a fraction each day, like her body was finally learning it didn't have to brace for the next blow. Cedric didn't get to rewrite his way out of what he'd done. He tried. Men always do when the story finally catches up. He claimed misunderstandings. He claimed paperwork mistakes. He even claimed Janelle had left, and he had moved on, like abandoning someone is the same as being abandoned. But the documents didn't argue. They just sat there, unblinking. The court process didn't feel like revenge. It felt like accountability doing its slow work. When the first hearing date was set, I didn't attend. I didn't need the theater. Janelle needed protection, not an audience. Edwin made sure she had both. Talia's consequence didn't come from me screaming at her. It came from her living with what she had chosen. She didn't post pictures. She didn't throw herself a second celebration to replace the one that soured. She went quiet. Not the quiet of pride, the quiet of someone replaying a moment over and over and finally hearing herself clearly. She moved out of the place Cedric had chosen, took only what belonged to her, and started the humiliating process of undoing what he'd tied to her name. She didn't ask me for shortcuts after that first day. She stopped asking me to just forgive. Instead, she showed up small ways at first. Groceries left on my porch. A note slid under my door that didn't beg, just acknowledged. One afternoon, she sat on my couch and cried without trying to defend herself. That was the first time I felt the old tenderness rise again, not because she deserved comfort, but because she was finally facing the truth without hiding behind it. I didn't rush her redemption. I didn't punish her forever either. I watched her. I waited. And slowly, I let her earn her way back toward me, one honest day at a time. Edwin thanked me in the way powerful men do when they mean it direct and private. Not a speech, not a parade. He invited me to lunch in a quiet place and slid an envelope across the table without drama. I didn't open it right away. I looked at him first. I didn't stop for money, I told him. I know, he said. His eyes held gratitude. Yes, but also respect. That's why you're being offered it anyway. It was enough to change my life if I wanted it to. Enough to breathe easier, to repair what needed repairing, to take care of myself without flinching at price tags. But money wasn't what sat deepest in my chest. What sat there was something older, something I'd almost forgotten in. The noise of being a mother to an adult child who didn't always act like she remembered who raised her. I stopped for a dying child. I stood in a hospital where intentions didn't matter until someone signed. I walked into a wedding and learned what my daughter would do when she thought the room mattered more than my dignity. I walked out quietly because dignity was the only thing no one could take unless I handed it over. And then I watched compassion circle back like a quiet boomerang, not as a reward, but as a reminder. I didn't gain a convoy. I didn't gain power. I gained myself again. And when I looked in the mirror one morning, hair wrapped, face bare, house still quiet, I didn't see a burden. I saw a woman who remembered who she was.